Mohammed says, hey guys, I'm currently trying to get a site ranked in Maps. It's slowly getting higher. The business is a service, but the GMB currently has an address. Would hiding the address by making it a service ruin the current momentum? That's a tricky one. I've seen some conflicting information on that in some of the forums and things like that. You know, if you don't have a storefront, I would based upon Google's terms or best practices or whatever, you should hide the address if you don't have a storefront. And that's, you know, Google tells us to do that. However, I have noticed because of Maps being more and more localized now, that if you have the address showing, you're typically going to rank better it's going to depend on like the searcher and where they're located. But for mobile, especially, having the actual address show is going to make a difference in how your Maps listing appears as far as like where it ranks in the mobile search results. And that's where I see like having a benefit of having that address being shown is for that. But outside of that, again, if you don't have a storefront, if customers do not come to the business location, then you're supposed to hide it. And so I always do. And I also always hide it because it's usually a PO box, right? So anybody have any comments on that?
Yeah, I would add that if it's moving and you're getting results and there are no problems, I would say just let it go.
Yeah.
Leave it. Don't make any changes while it. I always tell people, if it's dancing, don't touch it. And so if it's moving, it might drop a little bit, move up a little bit more, drop, move. You don't want to touch it. So you don't want to do anything that's going to disturb Googlebot deciding where you're going to be ranked in the end. Now, once that happens, wherever you end up, then you can decide what your next steps are.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not a bad. I mean, again, if it's not a PO box or something, then I would leave it. Like if it's a genuine address for that business, even though like it might be a service area business, that's what they call those, by the way, service area businesses. If it's a service area business and so it's a genuine address, but it's a service area business, I wouldn't touch it. I wouldn't change it right now because you're starting to gain some traction, just like Marco said. But if it's a spammed address, so to speak, then I would go ahead and hide it now anyways, because you always run the risk of getting it reported. But again, if it's a real business address, there's no reason to hide it. I mean, Google's best practices says you're supposed to for service area businesses. But as Marco said, I agree with that. I wouldn't mess with it if it's starting to gain traction. Okay. Okay. Columbia says the host you use. So you're using Liquid Web, Columbia, or WPX? Either one of those, because those are the two hosts that I use primarily now. If you're using either one of those, then yeah, you should be fine to just contact the host and to explain to them the problem, give them a sample set of the URLs that are rogue, and they can usually go in and clean it up. Okay.
Can I just, I mean, this isn't a plug or anything, but Liquid Web is the best. I've yet to see anyone outdo Liquid Web as far as customer service, as far as helping you out with problems. If you go in there and you act like a dummy, they'll do everything for you.
Yeah.
And so I go in there and just be myself, and they get everything done. Just do that, because you're going to be paying for a VPS, so the costs are going to be higher. And so they'll help you as much as they can. They'll stay on the phone with you until it's solved, or they'll do chat with you, however it is that you choose to do it. And for that, just for that, it's really worth the price.
Yeah, and you can always, if you're doing client work, you can always, like, especially if you build new sites and stuff for clients, you can charge them for hosting and host everything on your own VPS. And that's how you reduce and eliminate the costs of the VPS from Liquid Web. And you can also turn that into a small profit center too. Because those VPSs, you can put a lot of sites on, especially if you get a dedicated IP, then it's specific to you, and you don't have a bunch of other shared, you know, that's part of the reason why they got rid of shared hosting. Liquid Web did, so that they could have more control over the IPs and provide a better service to their user base.
Mm-hmm.
Pissed a lot of people off when they switched over, by the way, but we stayed with them anyways.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I was one of the guys that was on on the share account. The new one, deluxe,
Yeah.
deluxe hosting is not that bad actually. It's they're doing a good job for a share account. But yeah, I totally agree with Marco. You know, I've been like, I used to go a lot for HostGator until it becomes, you know, completely useless in a way that, it's like, it's a pain in the ass. And not only that, you're paying cheap, but at the end of the day, you need to do everything by yourself. You're like 1 hour in a queue for some guy to, you know, make a ticket for you because they cannot even solve the thing that you're calling in the first place. So it's like, if you're paying for a service, right? And if you think about it as an entrepreneur or an SEO, if you have an agency, your time is much more valuable than the money that you're paying your hosting, right? Because you need to be focusing on some other things, not troubleshooting your hosting. That's the least you know, important of your problem. So what I'm trying to say is that you need to treat your time as money too, and most importantly, you need to make sure that you have a team on your back. And Liquid Web does a great job because the guys are really, you can feel that they are really on your team, right? They're not trying to be assholes, or they're not on the company. If you say they're us against them, no, they're really put in your shoes, and you can get a lot more done. You're paying a little bit more, don't get me wrong, but that's the service it's worth it. That's the service you're paying for.
Yep, I totally agree. Guys, I used to go for cheaper hosting as well. I think we all do when we start out, but you learn over time that the cheap hosting costs you so much money, and it's because it first of all, opportunity cost, as Hernan just mentioned. If you're in there dealing with troubles that happen, like you know, like PHP is outdated, right? PHP version is outdated, so plugins or themes don't work correctly, or there's security issues, or like the vast majority of shared hostings overstuff the shit out of their IPs, so that there's way too many sites sharing the bandwidth. And so if any particular site gets hacked, or a DDoS attack or something like that, all the sites on that IP go down, and then you're screwed. And one of the worst ranking signals is a site that's going in and out all the time. So if you put an uptime monitor, I'm not talking, Columbia, I'm not talking to you specifically about this because you said the host we use, so it's probably a good one. I'm talking about other people that may be using cheap hosts. If you put Uptime Robot or some sort of uptime monitor on sites that you have in cheap hosting accounts, you'll get notifications via email or however you set up notifications about how often your sites are going down, that you don't even know it, because unless you're on the site all the time monitoring it, you don't know it. And that is a terrible ranking signal, right? And then not only that, but it's the bad neighborhood type stuff. If you go do a search on your IP from your website, from your host, and then go look at like who's hosted on this IP or whatever, you can just do a Google search and find a bunch of different sites that will show you all the sites that are hosted, the domains hosted on that particular IP. And you'll notice that there's a lot of really shitty, bad neighbors, so to speak, on those IPs. And so you don't want to be blocked in or lumped in, guilty by association, so to speak, with those shitty sites, because it ends up hurting you. It's a bad ranking signal, right? So if you go with a more a better type of managed type host, then you're gonna have a much higher quality of service, as well as like uptime will be better. It's a better ranking signal, all that kind of stuff.